Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to give it just one more minute to allow the rest of our participants to join. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for attending today. We have a very exciting topic to talk with you about, and that is cybersecurity. It's a huge passion of mine. I've been in information security for 15 years, and I think you're going to learn a lot from these women on the panel today. We're going to talk about hackers, threat actors, cyber intelligence. How do you keep your systems secure? And I want to introduce Sarah DeMaria. She is a VP Business Information Security Officer at the Federal Reserve. Emma McMullen, a cyber intelligence analyst at the Federal Reserve. And Courtney Rowell, cyber threat intelligence integration leader at Thomson Reuters. So we have several questions we're going to go through with these women today, and I'll also invite you to ask questions as well. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, and you will have a chance to win a pair of free RVA Tech earpods at the end. So ladies, a lot to go through today, and I've got some questions. I think, we're all hearing a lot in the news about how companies and individuals may be more at risk working from home than before when they were in the office. Is this true? And Sarah, maybe I'll pass over to you to get us started.
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely true. I think what you have to keep in mind is that, that day in March before COVID, when you went to work and you logged in, you were sitting on your company or your organization's network. And then literally you went home that night and the next day, nobody was sitting on it. You flipped a switch very quickly. And so for cybersecurity, when you think about that, prior to this, you had a remote workforce, you had a portion of people that were maybe traveling, but you knew what those general numbers were on a daily basis. And because of that, you can prepare for it. All of a sudden, overnight, you have a fully remote workforce and you kind of double, triple, exponentially expand your threat landscape, because now these people aren't sitting only on your network, they're connecting to it through their own networks. And think about how we had to teach people how to wash their hands again. If they couldn't remember to do that, do you think they're employing the same kind of, hygiene on their own personal networks? It's just not something the average person even thinks to do unless you work in this space. So it introduced a lot of variables that companies just weren't prepared for necessarily. And then when you think about the lives we live today are so hyper connected, how many devices sit on your personal network? I mean, it's embarrassing to list all of ours. We've got a Peloton and 2 kids' Kindle Fires and 2 iPhones and a personal computer and a soda, the list goes on. And all those things become potential entry nodes to a personal network that you hope you have put enough gateways in front of from a company perspective, but you just never know. And the threat actors, they are looking for any chink in the armor to come in. So I think when you think about that paradigm shift, how quickly it happened, it wasn't organic growth or organic change, it was totally inorganic, and it just really expanded in a way that nobody can control. Put so much onus on the user as opposed to the employer too. So I think all those variables just really shifted what the landscape looks like, and it makes you have to really change how you operate from a security perspective. I know both Courtney and Emma, with their experience, they see that on a daily basis. So, I think it's hugely different than it was in March.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think kind of as the lockdown restrictions have eased a little bit, some people are turning work from home to work from wherever you want, which is great to switch it up from being kind of stuck in your house for months on end, but it does present some additional risks. So think about if you're working from a place like a hotel or a coffee shop and using that public Wi-Fi, That's not secure. And that presents an opportunity for attackers to pretty easily gain access to your data if you're using those unsecured networks. Another thing I would mention is I think some folks, working from home might think, oh, well, I'm already at home. I'll just use my personal laptop to do this work. It's a lot easier. The risk there is that that device doesn't have the same robust security controls that you might have on your work device. And additionally, it doesn't provide the same visibility for the security teams in your company to be able to detect and respond to any nefarious cyber activity that might be going on those devices. So that's just a couple other things to keep in mind as we continue to be in this working remote environment.
Yeah, and Sarah and Courtney bring up some great points that asset inventory is often already a challenge, for organizations. And then you introduce all of the technology that needs to become in play for people to really work effectively while being remote. I mean, that's just a whole different ballgame. And then also on the adversary side, an operational intelligence perspective, we're seeing adversaries quickly pivot to knowing now that people are working from home. As Courtney said, maybe they're starting to blend together some of their work activities and some of their personal activities on some of their technologies. And actors know that, and they're starting to prepare for it. One thing we saw, pretty much right away is phishes that are trying to spoof, conference technology. So maybe you're getting a Zoom invite and you think that's for your upcoming job interview, and it's a phish. And maybe, you're invited to speak at a panel and it looks like a Zoom invite and that's a phish. These are things that actors are really smart. They can move faster often than the security side can keep up with them. So just always being very mindful that the adversaries are always pivoting, always evolving. And just because we're working from home doesn't mean we need to be any less mindful about security.
Yeah, that's great, Emma. And, I hear a lot of people saying, no one's attacking my company. Why would they want our information? Is this true? And why do individuals target and attack companies? And maybe Courtney, we can start off with you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Courtney. So I don't think there's a company out there that hasn't been targeted by cyber attacks to some degree. I think just because we may not always see it or be aware of it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So there's some attack types that are very obviously noisy or destructive. Take, for example, a DDoS attack that might take products and services offline, and it's readily apparent that there's some sort of bad activity going on. Some other threats, the actors may try to stay really quiet to go undetected so they can maintain that access to your network, maintain that access to any sensitive data that they're monitoring or quietly exfiltrating. Additionally, a lot of companies have kind of security controls in place to prevent attacks before they're happening. An example of that would be email controls that stop phishing campaigns from being delivered. So in those cases, we may not always be aware of all the types of attacks that are attempting to target us. So what are some examples of threat actor motivations or types of attacks that we should be aware of? A big one is financially motivated attacks. So attacks in which the actor is trying to benefit financially from whatever attack they're conducting. So a great example of that is ransomware. Certainly in 2020, we've seen an increase in successful ransomware attacks. And this really applies to any company. It doesn't really matter what size or what industry you're in. We're all dealing with money, right? So we've seen in the news, I'm sure we're all aware, huge companies like Garmin, for example, to small governments are being hit with ransomware attacks. Those financially motivated attacks are definitely something to keep in mind. Another attack type is it might be geopolitical in nature. So think nation state threat groups that might be trying to steal IP from your company or source code of your products to gain some sort of strategic market advantage, or conduct espionage activities and try to gain intelligence that might be of strategic value to their governments. Other attack types it may not be targeted. It could be simply opportunistic. Some threat actors conduct activities just for entertainment, just to see what they can do, or maybe they're practicing for a bigger attack they're planning and they want to practice and see what they can do in your environment. Oftentimes also threat groups might just try to conduct scanning activities to see what vulnerabilities are out there, where they have an entry point into a company, and then see what kind of data they're able to obtain that might be of value to them. So, I think there's really a wide threat landscape out there today, and I don't think there's any cases where companies aren't the potential to be victimized just because of the breadth of motivations and the types of attacks that are out there.
Yeah, Courtney, you bring up some great points about the, opportunistic attacks, especially around, financials. A lot of times people say, well, hey, I'm not working with state secrets. I don't deal with export controlled technology. Why do I need to invest in cybersecurity? Why does this matter for me? We're not, going to fit any of those big, scary nation state actors profiles. But that's really not true. And I think we've seen that a lot, especially in the past year with just how creative some of these threat actors can get, and particularly around the point of cybercrime and financially motivated actors. Maybe 5-10 years ago, we would have been talking about them at more of that script kiddie level, right? Oh, they're just, some low level actors. They're not the ones we really need to worry about. But over the years, we've really seen them start to innovate and start to do some really interesting techniques. And it's all about just who can I attack? It's opportunistic. Who's the weak link? It's that person in your company is clicking on that fish, going to a malicious website, working from home, and attaching to the coffee shop Wi-Fi. And as soon as they have that access point, that's when you're going to start seeing ransomware, but also some of these more sophisticated attacks now, like cryptojacking in a cloud environment that's not properly secured. We're starting to even see on the DDoS point that over the past summer, we were seeing, New Zealand Stock Exchange getting taken down by a DDoS attack that was actually supposed to be related, allegedly, to a nation state group that was threatening or extorting them for money, that if you don't pay, we're going to take you down with the DDoS, and then they were able to. And that's actually likely thought to be tied to cybercrime actors using that fear of nation states to target them. And I think it really goes to show that no matter who you are or what your profile is, there's always an actor looking for that particular angle that they're going to use to try to exploit your company for financial gain.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about crime in general, just in the physical world, there's every type of criminal out there, from the pickpocket to the skilled cat burglar to, the museum heist that nobody finds. It's the same in the cyber world. And it's all about, getting some kind of pay for them, whether it's enjoyment, entertainment, or money. And money is a huge financial motivation is like what makes the world go round. And when you think about the tough times people are facing these days and how connected we've become, the cyber world is a super easy, it's much easier to be a cyber criminal these days, I would say, than to be like a pickpocket, because whose pocket are you going to pick at the mall? There's nobody there. So, I mean, I think we just need to be a lot more vigilant, because it's the amount of activity we're seeing is only going to grow as we become more and more connected. We do more and more business, whether it's personal or professional, online.
Yeah, absolutely. So you all shared a lot about the threats and the attackers that are out there. Emma, maybe starting with you, how can you advise teams, developers, and leaders to protect against these threats? Are there some simple and even more complex things that they can do in their environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So, once you've kind of overcome that first challenge of convincing them, hey, we do need to invest in our security. Here's all the scary threats we just talked about. Really, I think of it in a two-phased approach, right? So that first phase is just, that strong security architecture, good endpoint monitoring, making sure that if you're producing products, you're following the security development lifecycle, patching for vulnerabilities. These are all generally things that you can build teams for, that most organizations know they need to have, that are core parts of any good SOC or security, posture policy. But I think the next phase of that is really where we start to get into what I like to think of as the proactive phase. And, coming from my Intel bias, this is where I think you can really start to see a difference in some innovative thinking for security. So that can come down to saying, from our Intel space, I know that we need to be, prioritizing this particular threat actor. We fit their profile. Maybe they've targeted us before. Let's start moving up what we call, the pyramid of pain, right? Moving away from more of that atomic indicator-based detection to behavioral-based detection. And not only that, but we're starting to look at maybe different fusion initiatives to say, all right, well, if Intel is driving strategy, right, informing leaders, this is what's coming, we need to invest in this. Now I want to go to my SOC manager or the head of the CERT, and I want to say, hey, let's do a hunt for this type of behavior. Hey, let's do a purple team engagement. Let's get emulation in here and say, let's start to prioritize this. Maybe then you identify some gaps, and maybe that's where let's start the policy for expanding our asset inventory or the way that we collect our logs. Essentially, as long as you're having that proactive mindset when you're building out these different security policies, that can sometimes be what makes the difference in proactively catching something, making sure that you stop them before they get to the fifth level of the kill chain, that you stop them in their tracks early so that nothing happens. And that's, I think, what's going to really make a difference for overall security.
Yeah, and I those are great points, Emma. I would add to that, I think activities like conducting penetration tests or application security scans are really, really important to be able to identify where there may be vulnerabilities in your products and in your network. It's great to do them. It's more important to be able to remediate those and close those security gaps. And I think taking a risk-based approach there and really going after what's most critical first is a good way to operate, because I think sometimes teams can feel kind of inundated with the requirements and the asks on the security side. So I think a risk-based approach in remediating those vulnerabilities is really important. I would also say I would highlight the importance of patching that Emma mentioned. So I talked a little bit before about threat groups that conduct mass scanning activities just to see where vulnerabilities exist and where they can get network access. If you're not patching, you're making it really, really easy for them and giving them an open door into your network and the ability to compromise assets within your network. So I would just highlight the importance of patching as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot, and I did come from the Intel space. We talk a lot about like the unknown unknowns and how do you get in front of those? And then we talk a lot about like the known unknowns. Well, like patching is the known knowns. So if you aren't patching, it's like you're leaving your door unlocked on your house, or you're not wearing your seatbelt. Like you should know better. I mean, and I think that's my biggest thing is these foundational elements around basic cyber hygiene. If you can't do those right, you'll never be able to get to that second phase where you can be proactive and put yourself in a posture where you're going to be able to catch things before they become a business ender. Because now cyber is not just about being able to work from home. It's a business enabler. So you've got to get really crisp on the foundational elements, and patching I think is the one that people just really seem to struggle on the implementation and the follow through for whatever reason. But it's the same everywhere I've worked. I feel like we constantly are having this conversation around patching. So I think those are great points.
Sarah, you bring up a good point. I mean, patching, you hear a lot of people say, well, we don't have time. We don't have room in the backlog. We have so many features we need to add. Whose responsibility is it? I mean, you think about, isn't that the security team's job? And what are consequences if you don't do some of those things like patching?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I just said cybersecurity is not just about protecting, your stuff. It is a business enabler, and it is a business ender. I mean, you can look at several businesses that have just never recovered fully from a breach. Reputational risk is a huge difficulty to overcome. And I mean, I think at the Fed, it is a very big concern for us because our organization doesn't just move money around the United States, it helps support the global economy. So if we can't keep it safe, we endanger, what people think about the safety of their money around the globe. That doesn't even have anything to do with the products themselves and everything to do with, how we operate as a business. So it's everybody's job. And I think when I hear developers and teams saying things like, oh, well, security just comes in at the end and they slow us down and they make us redo everything. I'm like, well, why didn't you talk to them in the beginning? This is coming. Like, the definition of insanity is doing things over and over again. Like, you should be doing it from the beginning. And I think if you truly believe that you're an innovator, if you truly believe that you are on the cutting edge in today's world, security is one of the things you're educating yourself about. You don't have to be an expert in it. You need to know who in your space is an expert, who should be brought in from the beginning. Because if you can't build a secure product in today's world, you probably shouldn't be putting a product out anyways. So, I mean, I think, number one, it's everybody's responsibility to know at least how they should be protecting themselves within their workspace. But when they're doing their job, especially in the development space, if security isn't something they at least think about in the beginning, whether they're doing it themselves or not, I don't think you can say that you're really pushing yourself to, your best limits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that there's a tendency to think of security as a cost center. And as Sarah said, like a thing that comes in at the end, or oftentimes we'd say a lot on the Intel side, we're the bad news bears because we're the ones who have to come in and say, actually, we're working this weekend because we need to patch this vulnerability right now. So, when you're in that position, it can be difficult to persuade leaders to say, no, we need to be in the room about like this particular acquisition or what our technology strategy is going to be. But I really think that security is not a cost center, it's a cost prevention center. Because at the end of the day, you have seen companies in the past where they get hit with one breach, maybe that's a service disruption that's really catastrophic to their, SLAs or their core deliveries. But that's what we always think of from the Fed perspective. But even, the exposure of PII, that's something that can result in so many fines and lawsuits that some of these breaches can end up being company killers. So at the end of the day, if you're consulting security early on, often you're investing in the people, investing in the technology, that's going to save you money at the end of the day because we know the breaches are coming. We always say, there's two types of companies, those who've been hacked and those who don't know that they've been hacked. And if you know it's coming, might as well invest in the security now so that it doesn't end up being a bigger bill in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's really also a partnership between security teams and technology teams. That's really how I think about it. So the security teams are the ones making the recommendations, highlighting vulnerabilities and risk, providing the security tools. But we really rely on the tech teams building the products, managing the assets in the network to make sure that those security pieces are actioned and implemented. And at the end of the day, as both Sarah and Emma highlighted, we're all on the same team. No one wants a product to be compromised or threat actors gaining access to our network. That's going to be a bad day for everybody, right? And can result in brand impact, customer impact. So I think our goal is really the same, and it's really a partnership between everyone. As Emma said, security really is everyone's job, and we can all partner to make the process easier.
Yeah, absolutely, Courtney. I 100% agree. And I know we had one more question, but I'm going to skip over to the participants' questions because I think they're great. The first question I wanted to ask you all is from Lori Walker. And Lori, I think this is a great question. So congratulations. You are the winner of our RVA Tech EarPods. Lori asked, why have so many US companies been slow to embrace the importance of maintaining system security? Look at the number of financial institutions that have been breached in the last 5 years due to really bad practices.
I think that's a really great question, Lori. And, on the Fed side, we're always looking at, what's happening in the financial space, particularly. What are threat actors doing? Where are we going to be, moving forward? Who's getting breached and how, particularly? And a lot of what we saw over the past years, it's just like, how could they not have patched that? How could they not have, secured that cloud instance? How could they not have seen that coming? And I think it's really easy to poke holes retrospectively when like, well, we patched that, like we were on top of it. But at the end of the day, I think, again, it's that whole like cost center versus proactive security approach that sometimes they think, well, we've done enough. If I've poured millions of dollars into this, they better be fine. And there's often such a push to move quickly sometimes in terms of technology innovation. So the whole move to the cloud, right? We've got to do it by this particular date. It's going to happen. And they don't bring security along for the ride. And then they're going to end up getting compromised, or they're saying, well, we've got, maybe a vendor to help us with some of the, patching recommendations. But if they're not investing in that team and bringing them into the rest of the SOC in terms of building out playbooks, that's something we've been doing a lot at the Fed. What is our vulnerability playbook process? So that way we know how quickly we need to patch. And that's plugged into the teams that are doing the patching and are making those recommendations within the organization. A lot of places just don't have that investment or communication, and that's when you're going to have a breach.
Great.
Yeah, I think Emma hit the nail on the head with companies moving really, really fast and not always bringing security along for the ride as they are pivoting to those new technologies. And something to keep in mind is threat actors are also constantly moving forward, developing new techniques to evade detection. So as we're moving forward, with our products and our technology, it's important to remember that the attackers are doing the same thing and not be lulled into a false sense of security because maybe you haven't had a breach, in a long time, or you think it's not a risk.
I also think, you're talking about the financial sector and how in the US we see this and we don't see it necessarily across the globe. And part of that is the regulatory risk. So part of the rules that they put in place for themselves, the standards they put in place for themselves are based on what regulatory fines they might incur. And I would say from a government perspective, the US government from a cyber law perspective is not on the cutting edge yet. I don't think, government just moves a lot slower than the average company. And so in the EU, you have much stricter data laws, you have much stricter cyber laws, and we don't have that here in the US. And then there's also somewhat of a safety net. I mean, if like Bank of America has a breach, it's not going to go the road of Lehman Brothers and be gone. I mean, we saw what that did in 2008 and the impact to the global financial market to see a large bank like that fail. So I think the cost benefit there, should they invest in certain things, along with it is really easy, hindsight's 2020 to be like, why didn't you do this? So I think if we could see cyber law and regulatory kind of space catch up a bit, you might see a lot less of these practices.
Great point, Sarah. Agree. So this question I'm gonna send over to Courtney. This comes from Brianne Dumbos. What advice do you have for new graduates trying to get into the cybersecurity industry?
Sure, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is that there are a lot of great free resources out there if you want to kind of build your knowledge base and your skill set on the cyber side. There's a lot of free trainings and resources, and certainly there's a ton of information out there to kind of stay up to date on what are the trends and kind of what areas might you be interested in moving forward on your career path in the security space. I would also say, even if you have your initial role that might not be directly in the cybersecurity space, a lot of companies do have a security function. So what I would suggest is, if there's an area in the security space that you're really interested in, reach out to those teammates or others in the company and ask to kind of sit down with them, have them walk you through, shadow them, what is their day-to-day like, and ask questions. I can say, as someone on the security side, we love when people outside of the security space come to us and are interested in the work that we're doing. So I would say leverage your network, leverage others in the place that you work that may be working on the types of security initiatives that you might be interested in your career.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. And I'm going to ask one more question. I think we've got time for one more, and I'm going to combine a couple. So William Hunt and Carol Nitz asked about, you discussed ways that companies can protect themselves, but as people are working remotely, I know we touched on a little bit earlier, what things can they do and what can companies do from security awareness? You hear about KnowBe4, some of these companies. What are things that the companies can do to help their remote workers? And then what can the remote worker do?
So I know one thing that we've been thinking about as we, again, make that transition to an entirely remote workforce is making sure that obviously you're doing really good phishing awareness exercises, but also making sure that that is tailored to what's, currently being seen in the wild. So one thing we'll see is, all right, if we know, like I brought up before, if we know that threat actors are sending out like fake Zoom links, for example, let's make sure we do a bunch of phishing awareness practices, exercises, and see how many people will click on that in our organization. Now we know, all right, here's your awareness piece. That was actually, a test. You might have failed, but make sure that next time you see that, you're aware of what it's going to look like. And I think just being really proactive about not just doing those exercises, but again, tailoring them to what adversaries are actually doing can go a long way into helping that awareness piece.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Courtney. I think this has been really helpful. I hope everybody was able to learn something and take something back to their home and their office virtually or in person. But appreciate everyone's time today. And thank you so much for joining. We will see you over the executive panel in just a few minutes.